All right, so we're getting to the good stuff now, and probably what everyone's looking forward to. So thank you, Hillary, for answering those questions. And we'll dive into our first case study. So the title I gave this one, I guess, is Supporting a Toddler into Teaching Consolidating Sleep. So let's dive in. Here's the case description. So in this case, this 3-year-old autistic child, it was taking 1 to 2 hours to fall asleep. The sleep issues had been reportedly occurring since infancy, and this is pretty common for us to hear. Sleep problems were delayed onset to sleep, taking upwards of 2+ hours to actually fall asleep at that typical bedtime, so when trying to be put to bed earlier. Let's see, here we go. Sleep was spread out throughout the day, so naps were inconsistent, naps were sometimes really long, naps were sometimes not happening. Some nights were later bedtime, other nights were earlier. Everything was just, it depended on the day. The client had difficulty settling down in the evening and naturally would fall asleep much later than parents would have liked for his age. It was some past 10 o'clock most nights and sometimes later depending on the day. So to start with, we looked at what are the parent goals. And with collaboration, we decided that increasing overall sleep duration was one of the most important parts. This child wasn't getting a lot of sleep to begin with, especially for that age level. So really looking to extend his sleep and getting it to a more consistent schedule. Decreasing night wakings. So night wakings would go down, and sometimes when they wake up, be ready to go for the day, and then would have a nap at like 7 a.m. Till 9. So the sleep was just all over the place. And then decreasing time to fall asleep. So once put in bed, hoping that they'll fall asleep within that magic 15 to 30-minute window. And for this plan, we broke it down into many different parts. Again, sleep is complex, so there's lots of moving variables, and we'll talk about that. Part 1. This one is, setting regular daily meal schedules. This one can be challenging, especially if there's a lot going on. There's a lot of pre-planning that comes with organizing your own meal schedule as well as your kids, depending on their needs when it comes to food. So we started with creating a regular daily meal schedule that worked well for the parents and what was going on throughout the day based on activities. Before intervention, this client was more of a grazer, so eating sporadically throughout the day, never really having full meals, and so that feeling of hunger never really came up. The purpose of creating a meal schedule is to help anchor that circadian rhythm. If we're grazing and meals are inconsistent, the gastrointestinal system, so our digestive system, can be thrown off track, which then starts to allow our body clock to be out of sync with what's actually going on. It's also good for our digestive system to have rest between feedings so that it has time to recover and then get ready for its next job. But if it's constantly overworked, you're going to start to see issues come up. Some strategies to support in making this adjustment to the daily schedule is a use of visual schedule. So in this case, I don't think we ended up needing it, but it is an option to use when meal times are basic, and for meal times and basic transitions throughout the day. This also allows, I think, parents to anchor their day and get back on track with meals. Depending on the learner, this might be a good fit or not. Pictures can be helpful, text prompts can be helpful, and we'll talk about that too. I have one for a teen that I can show an example. Preloading and explaining the changes, so explaining why this change might be happening and or just setting it up so that this starts to become the new normal, as well as pre-planning. So if we know it's picky eater, maybe just for consistency's sake, while starting our sleep plan, just having foods that you know they'll regularly eat and not tackling too much new stuff at that time. Part 2, implementing a new bedtime routine. So being mindful that we've changed the daily routine, that can be overwhelming, it can be a lot. So breaking it up into parts is helpful. This one is the bedtime routine and really setting the stage for sleep. And so the recommendations in here are based on that understanding of our melatonin, of our body clock. So with the daytime routine sorted and running smoothly, we then implemented a new bedtime routine. And with a new bedtime and wake time associated with that. And this was based on the data, and I'll be able to show that to you in a minute. The bedtime routine is extremely important, as we've talked about, especially if the problem is delayed onset to sleep. That 30 minutes leading up is so key to help cue your body to start getting into that, that tiredness phase and just relaxing. It's telling us, so for delayed onset though, if there is delayed onset, it tells us that the sleep pressure drive is just not high enough and possible cortisol is high and or melatonin release is not quite happening at that time. So all of those systems need to be in order, and that's where your data is going to be really helpful. As you'll see on this bedtime routine, the suggestions start 2 hours before, and that 2 hours before is when that melatonin is starting to peak. So we're trying to set the stage as best we can so that we're taking advantage of the natural melatonin production. So in this case, we did starting to limit screen time 2 hours before. So there's your light exposure as well as just your brain activation. So trying to limit that as much as possible. Shower or bath. So trying to do this 2 hours before. In this case, bath and shower was quite overstimulating. So it wasn't helpful to do that right before bed, but some kids find it relaxing and it's a great part of their routine. So you really just have to look at the cues that they're giving you after bath to decide, do I need to move this earlier or can I keep it at this time? And then the last snacks offered around 2 hours before. Again, like Hillary mentioned, there's some flexibility here. For this one, we offered it a bit earlier just to make things smoother. At about 1.5 hours before bed, so again, the before bedtime is that goal asleep time. That's when the dimming of the lights happened. You can do this even earlier if you'd like. This will help with that melatonin production, as well as scheduling in high one-on-one quality time with parents. Parents at bedtime seem to become more valuable when they're in the bedroom and it's actually time for them to go to sleep. So to mitigate that and as a preventative strategy, scheduling in that attention before can be helpful if you do need to leave the room at bedtime. Their cup should probably be full and it reduces their motivation to seek you out. In a perfect world, not always. At about 30 minutes before that goal time of sleep, this is when the more structured part of the routine occurred. That really strict steps that you do. So in this case, there's a bathroom routine that was very similar every night, getting into bed and then settling in quality calm time in the bedroom together for about 15 minutes or so. This allowed that, again, parent one-on-one quality attention, so making sure that they were present, fully present, as well as putting on the white noise machine to get used to the new white noise. White noise hadn't been used before, so allowing them to be with the parent while experiencing that was helpful. At about 15 minutes before that goal sleep time, so knowing when they're likely to fall asleep and that sleep pressure is high, that's when the tuck-in happened and the last cuddle happened. In this case, parents decided they wanted to wait on the floor. They weren't ready to fade themselves out yet, and we just wanted to see what would happen with just this one change. And we started with this and knew that if night wakings did persist, then we would have to work on fading them out, as the parent could have been a sleep dependency. And in this case, they actually weren't a sleep dependency. They were able to stay waiting on the floor and the night wakings did drop. And we'll go into the results a little bit more detail in a minute. Okay. Now, because the sleep schedule was a bit all over the place and we needed to reconsolidate sleep and start teaching longer sleep without those breaks, we did something called sleep restriction. It also is known as sleep rescheduling. It really is just adjusting the sleeping conditions and how long you're allowed to sleep for. So in combination with the new bedtime routine, we also had this happen at the same time. And this was to address the night wakings and then the sleep. So in this case, we chose to go with sleep restriction because there was potential for the student to wake up their sibling. And with this one, there's less unrest in the middle of the night, hopefully, because the night wakings do go down. And to tell you more about how to do it, it is a method of where you calculate the average duration of sleep in a 24-hour period and across a week or two. So you do need quite a bit of data to understand what is the natural rhythm of the child or of that individual, because everyone is so very different, especially if sleep is starting to get off track. So using that sleep diary that we showed you in previous slides and calculating the total duration of sleep, including naps, even if there's 1 or 2 naps or maybe a nap in the car, adding that in is really helpful. Every minute does count. And then from that average, you calculate what 90 to 95% of that total is. I usually go up on the higher end because, we don't know exactly how much sleep. We don't have those really like electrodes and things that are calculating exactly how much sleep we have. So I do like to go on the higher end, and if we do need to go to 90, we will. And so for example, for math's sake, if someone's averaging 10 hours, then 90% of that would be 9 hours, or 95% of that would be 9.5 hours. So you're really keeping that sleep window at a lesser time than they're averagely sleeping. Now, there are some risks and benefits to this approach, and it's really important to be aware of these, as well as to explain that to anyone that you're working with, or just know what you're getting yourself into. The benefits being that the individual will sleep for longer chunks of time, and night wakings will be reduced and or even eliminated. There is less likelihood for emotional reactions in the evening with this method, and at bedtime, as sleep pressure is quite high and motivation to sleep is established, you can start to actually delay the onset to sleep as well. So it tackles both those goals. The risks of this is that the individual may get less sleep for the first couple of weeks. And this is hard. So especially with adults and teens and understanding this, speaking about being able to tell them you're going to feel sleepy is helpful. If they aren't able to understand that, then just being aware of how much demand is being placed throughout the day. And that maybe now is not a time to start working on other goals. Let's just focus on sleep. So limited sleep can result in more daytime sleepiness, irritability, and we talked all about that. So being mindful of this as you're moving forward. In this case, too, there was naps. So at 3 years old, naps are to be expected, as well as in daycare, naps were required. And with sleep restriction in full swing, we needed to have the daycare on board with us so that the plan went smoothly. Before starting, sleep was sporadic at the daycare, sometimes sleeping really long, not napping at all. To support the daycare, we sent a quick cheat sheet and guidelines for naps. So really setting those clear environmental cues, which would be about 30 minutes before wanting them to fall asleep. Quiet activity, one-on-one attention again, maybe reading a book. Dimming the lights, but it's not completely dark, and turning on a sound machine if they needed it. And allowing the student that time to settle in. Some kids, you can put them on a cot or on their little mats and they'll relax. Others need time, and their bodies need time to process what environmental information is coming through. This was effective, and with sleep restriction, I think that also helped because the motivation for sleep was there, so naps became more consistent and more valuable. We did have to set guidelines though, because when sleep restriction is in place, they'll want to sleep more during nap time, and if lets to sleep, then that's gonna make nighttime harder for parents because now they have less of a window now to let them sleep at night. Okay. Now for the results. So we have some graphs here to just show what happened over time. On this graph, you see 3 phases. So in the blue column is the baseline data. The total number of minutes to fall asleep pre-intervention was between 5 and 160 minutes. That's a long time, so over 2 hours. Delayed sleep onset did decrease because bedtime was pushed to later to start. So before, parents were trying to put the child to bed at 7:15 or 8 p.m., as a 3-year-old might go to bed at that time, but that was not based on his clock. That was his melatonin hadn't probably peaked yet. Other things weren't in place, and he just was not tired. So where he was more alert and his sleep pressure was just not high. When he was put to bed this early, he was practicing playing and being awake in bed. So we talked about this too. Spending too much time in bed, not sleeping, then the bed can start to trigger awakeness and alertness. So we wanted to fix that. So by rescheduling bedtime to about 9:30, 10, and again, speaking with parents, what is reasonable? What do you think you can do? Would you prefer to have a later bedtime and a sleep in, or would you prefer earlier bedtime and maybe an early waking? So really making sure that we're individualizing that. And they were fine with that for now. And we were able to capture that sleep pressure. That was his natural fall asleep time. And then it's supported in the association and teaching that bed equals sleep. And so over time you see that delayed onset, that the total number of minutes went down to a typical level of 20 to 30 minutes. And again, this child needed that time to just be able to relax in bed. He didn't fall asleep right away. In this graph, it looks at the total hours slept in 24 hours. So again, we're calculating naps plus time asleep at night. At baseline, again on the blue here, duration was all over the place, between 7.75 hours to 11 hours in a 24-hour period. This pattern of inconsistent sleep duration maintained even into intervention, but you can see that the dips became less. As you notice in the graph, there were nights of lots of sleep, and then the next night there was less. So if there's always a catch-up. And so noticing this and visually seeing it, I find it really helpful. And parents have reported that it's helpful to see these changes so that they can see that there's improvement over time. The yellow columns here in the intervention phase, sleep restriction was in place, and we started with 9.5 hours for a 24-hour period, which meant 2-hour nap because the daycare really wanted that to be in place, and it was hard to make that less, and then 7.5 hours at night, which is tough for a 3-year-old and something we had to work together and decide, is this something that we can do? And so we quickly increased to 10.5 hours because he was actually really hard to keep awake to that bedtime that we wanted now. And then we maintained this for a month as sleep began to stabilize. We tried to increase it above 10.5 hours at this point, but that seemed to be the magic number that he needed to be in. And over time, if the parents, I haven't talked to them in a while, but they might have been able to increase it, and our naps do start to drop after 4 years old. So that might mean that sleep will increase overnight. During this time, we actually had other things happen because life happens. And we decided the family wanted to fade out the soother. At this age, soother is okay, but they wanted that out. And so he seemed fine. They seemed fine with it. And it wasn't too much of a hiccup, just moved it away. And then you see there's like a big spike in sleep. I think it's 12 hours there. And that's when the child was sick. And that's okay. So rule of thumb, when kids are sick, drop all sleep intervention plans and just allow them to sleep, because sleep is the best medicine for recovering from a cold or recovering from an illness. And then once they're feeling better and you're able to get back on track, then you can start implementing the changes again. You can still maintain daily routines, but again, when we're sick, just make sure you're sleeping. And sleep restriction can go on pause for a moment. And you do see, as soon as that 12-hour sleep happened, there was quite a dip, but we were able to get back on track. So the first question is, my son prefers light from TV than dim light. Is this okay? Depending on the intensity of the light and depending on the case. So if they're still tired and still showing signs of tiredness, then it might be okay. But there is still a lot of blue light that comes out of TVs. I think the fancier ones have the blue light blocking. Mine definitely does not. So I wear blue light blocking glasses if I'm watching TV. But if it's just the TV and it's dark room, then maybe that's okay too, because sometimes there's like a humming noise that comes with TV, and that's also relaxing. Second question, For the sleep restriction, once you've calculated number of hours, do you just work backwards from the time you want the child to wake up to calculate bedtime? Depends, but yes. For bedtime, you're looking at what is the average time they're falling asleep. So in this case, even though they tried to put the child to bed at 8, they still were on average falling asleep between 10, 10:30. And so we decided that 10 was our new bedtime because the likelihood, again, of their sleep pressure being high was there, circadian rhythm being low was there. And so they were more likely to fall asleep within 15 to 30 minutes, which making it more of a success in teaching bedtime. Then adding in and only allowing that, let's say if it's a 9-hour sleep, allowing 9 hours of sleep and nothing more. So keeping that wake time after 9 hours. So in this case, you're actually adjusting, you're just keeping the bedtime consistent, and then you're slowly extending wake time to try to extend it. Because again, it's hard to move bedtime back. Once you've got your sleep consolidated, that's when you can start to fade bedtime earlier, which is helpful. And somebody you can do that like by 15 minutes at a time.